The whispers started the moment Sarah Mitchell stepped off the stagecoach in Redemption Creek, Arizona Territory in the summer of 1881, her worn carpetbag clutched tight and her eyes deliberately avoiding the curious stares of the townspeople who had already heard every sordid detail about the woman with the scarlet past. She had come west with nothing but $20 sewn into her petticoat and a determination to outrun the mistakes that had branded her back in St. Louis. The boarding house proprietor, Mrs. Abigail Hutchins, a thin-lipped woman with iron-gray hair pulled back so tight it seemed to stretch her disapproval even wider across her face, made it abundantly clear that Sarah would be tolerated but never accepted. The room cost twice what it should have, but Sarah paid without complaint, knowing that desperation showed like blood in water, and there were always sharks circling women like her. Within 3 days, she found work at the general store owned by Albert Pearson, a portly man in his 60s whose rheumatism made lifting flour sacks and organizing high shelves an increasing burden. He asked no questions about her past, only whether she could count change and handle inventory. Sarah could do both and more, her neat handwriting and quick mathematics proving invaluable as she reorganized his chaotic bookkeeping system within the first week. But competence could not silence wagging tongues. The women of Redemption Creek gathered at the church social that Sunday, their voices rising and falling like a murder of crows settling on fresh gossip. Margaret Thompson, the banker's wife, had a cousin in St. Louis who knew someone, and the story spread like wildfire through dried brush. Sarah Mitchell had been engaged to a prominent lawyer's son, they said, until she was discovered in a compromising position with a different man entirely. The engagement shattered, her reputation destroyed. Her family had disowned her. Some versions claimed she had been carrying a child, though no evidence supported this embellishment. Others whispered she had been seen in a gambling hall or worse, a saloon where proper women never ventured. The truth was simultaneously more complicated and less scandalous than the rumors suggested, but Sarah had learned that truth mattered far less than perception. She kept her head down, did her work, and spoke only when necessary. She attended church because not attending would have been even worse, sitting alone in the back pew while the respectable families clustered together like fortresses of righteousness. James Cooper noticed her the second Sunday she attended services. He sat 3 rows ahead with his younger sister Emma, a girl of 16 who lived with him on the ranch he had built from nothing over the past 8 years. James was 30 years old, tall and lean with sun-weathered skin and dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. His hands were calloused from rope and reins, his shoulders broad from years of hard labor, and his eyes the color of creek water under summer sun, clear and steady and quietly observant. He watched Sarah bow her head during prayer, watched the intentional smallness she made of herself, the way she slipped out immediately after the final hymn to avoid the social hour where coffee and judgment were served in equal measure. Something in her careful dignity reminded him of a wild horse he had once gentled, all trembling wariness and barely contained flight instinct, waiting for the next blow. Emma tugged his sleeve as they left the church. "That is the new woman everyone talks about. Mary Beth said her mother said she is trouble." James looked down at his sister with mild reproach. "Mary Beth's mother enjoys trouble a bit too much for my liking. Judge not, Emma. Remember that part?" Emma flushed but nodded, properly chastened. James had raised her since their parents died of fever 7 years ago when she was 9, and he was 23, newly established on a modest ranch that he had nearly lost trying to care for a grieving child while managing cattle and crops and all the brutal demands of survival in the territory. They had made it through, though, the two of them against the world, and Emma adored her brother with fierce loyalty. The following Tuesday, James rode into town for supplies, ostensibly needing fence wire and nails, though truthfully his need was more curiosity than construction. He entered Pearson's general store as the afternoon sun slanted through the windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Sarah stood behind the counter, carefully wrapping a purchase of fabric for Mrs. Henderson, who accepted the package without a word of thanks and departed with her nose elevated as though smelling something foul. Sarah's shoulders dropped slightly once the woman left, a barely perceptible release of tension. Then she straightened, smoothing her simple blue calico dress, and turned to James with a professional smile that did not quite reach her eyes. "Good afternoon. How may I help you?" Her voice surprised him. It was educated, cultured even, with none of the roughness he associated with frontier women who had been worn down by hard living. This was a voice that had read books, attended school, known a different life. "I need 20 yards of fence wire and 2 pounds of nails," James said, removing his hat. "The 3-inch ones, if you have them." "We do." Sarah moved with efficient grace, locating the nails and measuring out the wire with precise movements. As she worked, James observed her more carefully. She was perhaps 23 or 24, with auburn hair pinned neatly beneath a simple bonnet, fair skin that suggested she had not been in the territory long, and green eyes that held both intelligence and carefully guarded sorrow. Pretty, though she seemed to take no pleasure in the fact. "You are new to Redemption Creek," James said, not quite making it a question. Sarah's hands paused for just a fraction of a second before continuing their work. "I arrived 2 weeks ago." "From St. Louis?" Now she looked up, her expression closing like a door. "Yes, that will be $2.40. James paid, noting how she avoided his eyes as she counted the change. He had never been particularly skilled at conversation, especially with women, but something compelled him to try. It is a hard place to be new. This town can be unwelcoming. "I have noticed." Her tone was flat, discouraging further discussion. James collected his purchases, settled his hat back on his head, and turned to leave. At the door he paused and looked back. Sarah had already busied herself with reorganizing a shelf, her back straight and her movements deliberate, as though staying in motion could keep loneliness at bay. "Miss Mitchell," James said quietly. She turned, surprise flickering across her face that he knew her name. "If you ever need anything, my ranch is 4 miles west on Copper Creek. The Cooper Ranch. Anyone can give you directions." Before she could respond, he was gone, the bell above the door chiming his departure. Sarah stood motionless for a long moment, the unexpected kindness settling over her like an unfamiliar garment. In 2 weeks, no one had offered her anything but cold tolerance or outright hostility. She did not know what to do with generosity. That evening, as she ate her solitary dinner in her room at the boarding house, listening to the cheerful conversation of other boarders downstairs who never invited her to join them, Sarah allowed herself to think about the cowboy with the steady eyes. James Cooper. She had heard the name mentioned in the store. He ran a successful ranch, kept to himself mostly, had raised his younger sister after their parents died. The women who discussed him did so with approval, noting his respectability, his hard work, his devotion to his sister. If he had vices, they were well hidden. The thought came unbidden and unwelcome. A man like that would never seriously consider someone like her. And even if he did, she would only bring him trouble. Better to appreciate the small kindness and expect nothing more. But James Cooper had other ideas. He found reasons to come to town more frequently over the following weeks. He needed a new bridle, then coffee and sugar, then buttons for Emma's dress that she insisted she could not find anywhere else. Each time, he made polite conversation with Sarah, gradually extending their exchanges from mere transactions to something approaching actual dialogue. He learned she had been a school teacher in St. Louis before everything fell apart. She learned he had come west at 21 with dreams of building something lasting, something that belonged to him. He mentioned books he had read during long winter evenings, surprised to find she had read the same ones. She asked about ranching with genuine curiosity, and he found himself explaining the intricacies of cattle breeding and water rights with an enthusiasm he rarely displayed. The town noticed, of course. Redemption Creek noticed everything. "That Cooper boy is making a fool of himself over the Mitchell woman, Mrs. Thompson announced at the church ladies' auxiliary meeting in late August. Someone ought to warn him what kind of woman she really is. I heard she was practically a prostitute in St. Louis, added Mrs. Henderson, her voice dripping with scandalized delight. The actual story, that Sarah had been caught alone with a man who was not her fiancé in circumstances that were innocent but looked damning, had been thoroughly embellished with each retelling. Even Reverend Miller, normally a temperate man, felt compelled to mention something to James when he encountered him outside the post office. "James, I wonder if I might have a word about Miss Mitchell." James regarded the Reverend with polite attention. "What about her?" The Reverend shifted uncomfortably. "There are concerns about her past, about her character. I would hate to see you, a respected member of this community, become entangled with someone whose reputation is so compromised." James was quiet for a long moment, his jaw working slightly as he considered his response. When he spoke, his voice was level but hard as iron. "Reverend, I have attended your church for 8 years. In that time, I have heard you preach about forgiveness, redemption, and loving one's neighbor more times than I can count. I assumed you believed those things." "Of course I do, but—" "Then perhaps you might extend some of that Christian charity to Miss Mitchell, who has done nothing in this town except work hard and keep to herself. If there are sins in her past, I imagine the Lord is capable of judging them without assistance from the good people of Redemption Creek." James touched the brim of his hat. "Good day, Reverend." He walked away, leaving the Reverend staring after him with an expression of mingled surprise and consternation, but the whispers only intensified. When James began driving Sarah home from the store in his wagon each evening, a courtesy he offered after finding her walking alone at dusk past the saloon where drunken men sometimes called out crude suggestions, the town erupted in scandalized speculation. Mrs. Hutchins raised Sarah's rent again, making pointed comments about not running an establishment for women of questionable morals. Mr. Pearson, facing pressure from prominent wives who threatened to take their business elsewhere, gently suggested that perhaps Sarah might consider finding employment in another town where her presence would cause less controversy. Sarah sat in her small room that night, the walls seeming to close in around her, and felt the familiar despair settling into her bones. She had been naive to think she could ever outrun her past. Mistakes, it seemed, followed you like shadows, growing longer and darker as the sun set on your chances for happiness. A knock at her door startled her. Miss Hutchins stood in the hallway, her expression even more pinched than usual. "There is a man here to see you. I told him it was improper for him to call on a lady in her room, so he is waiting in the parlor. 5 minutes, Miss Mitchell, and no more." James stood when Sarah entered the parlor, hat in hand, his expression troubled. "I heard that Pearson let you go." Sarah lifted her chin, determined not to cry in front of him. "He was kind about it. Gave me 2 weeks' pay and a good reference, though I doubt it will matter. Mrs. Hutchins has made it clear I need to find somewhere else to live by the end of the week." "This is my fault." James took a step toward her. "My attention has made things worse for you." "You have been nothing but kind to me, Mr. Cooper. The fault lies with this town's small-mindedness, not with you." Sarah managed a sad smile. "I will move on. Perhaps Santa Fe, or even California. Somewhere no one knows my history. Or you could stay." The words came out rougher than James intended, fueled by a frustration that had been building for weeks as he watched this gentle, intelligent woman being crucified for sins both real and imagined. "You could stay as my wife." The silence that followed was absolute. Sarah stared at him, certain she had misheard. "What did you say?" James set his hat on a side table and ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of nervousness she had never seen from him before. "I know this is sudden. I know we have only known each other for 6 weeks. But I also know that you are kind, intelligent, hardworking, and brave. You came out here alone trying to build a new life. That takes courage." He met her eyes directly. "I do not care what happened in St. Louis. I care about the woman standing in front of me now." "You would marry me?" Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. "You would tie yourself to someone the whole town despises? You would risk your reputation, your business, your standing in this community for me? Yes. The word was simple, absolute, offering no room for doubt. Tears began streaming down Sarah's face, though she made no sound. All the fear and loneliness and desperate hope she had been holding back for months came pouring out. James closed the distance between them and, with a gentleness that seemed incongruous with his work-roughened hands, wiped the tears from her cheeks. I will not pretend I can promise you an easy life, Sarah. Ranching is hard work, and Emma can be a handful sometimes, though I think she will come to love you. But I can promise you respect, partnership, and a home where your past does not matter. I can promise that I will defend you against anyone who tries to hurt you. He paused, then added quietly, and I believe, given time, I could promise you love. I think I'm already halfway there. Sarah let out a laugh that was half sob. I do not deserve this. I do not deserve you. Let me be the judge of that. James smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his usually serious face into something approaching boyish. Will you marry me, Sarah Mitchell? She should say no. She should spare him the scandal, the whispered comments, the social ostracism that would inevitably follow. She should protect him from her past, but she was so desperately tired of running, and this man with his steady eyes and quiet strength was offering her something she had thought forever lost, a chance at belonging. Yes, Sarah breathed. Yes, I will marry you. James pulled her into his arms then, holding her as though she were something precious and fragile, and Sarah allowed herself to lean into his strength, to believe that maybe, just maybe, redemption was possible after all. The news exploded through Redemption Creek like a stick of dynamite. James Cooper, one of the town's most eligible and respected bachelors, was marrying the Mitchell woman. Within hours, a delegation of concerned citizens had assembled, determined to talk sense into him before he made a catastrophic mistake. They found him at the ranch the next morning repairing a section of fence. His foreman, an older man named Diego, who had worked for James since the beginning, watched with amusement as the group approached. Reverend Miller, Mayor Thornton, banker George Thompson, and several other prominent men of the community. James, we need to talk to you about this engagement, the mayor began without preamble. We are here as your friends, concerned about your welfare. James straightened, setting down his tools and wiping his hands on his trousers. I appreciate your concern, gentlemen, but my decision is made. You do not understand what kind of woman she is, Mr. Thompson interjected. My wife has connections in St. Louis. The stories about Miss Mitchell, they are quite shocking. She was involved in a scandal that destroyed her engagement and ruined her family's name. Did she commit a crime? James asked mildly. The men exchanged glances. Well, no, not exactly, but did she hurt anyone? The point is not whether she committed a specific crime, Reverend Miller said. The point is her judgment, her character, her moral standing. A woman like that is not fit to be the wife of a man like you. James crossed his arms, his expression hardening. A woman like what, exactly? A woman who made a mistake? A woman who trusted the wrong person? A woman who has been punished and shamed and driven from her home for something that, from what I understand, involved being alone with a man for 10 minutes? His voice grew sharper. You speak of moral standing. Where is your moral standing when you gather like vultures to tear apart someone who cannot defend herself? This is not about cruelty, the mayor protested. This is about protecting the social fabric of our community. If we allow women of questionable character to be accepted into respectable society, what message does that send? It sends the message that we believe in second chances, James shot back. It sends the message that mistakes do not define a person forever. It sends the message that we actually mean it when we talk about Christian forgiveness instead of just using it as a cudgel to feel superior. Diego, still watching from nearby, allowed himself a small smile. He had known James would not back down, stubborn as a mule when he believed he was right. You are throwing away your future for a woman you barely know, mister, Thompson said, trying a different tack. Think about Emma. Think about what having such a woman as her sister-in-law will do to her prospects. I think having a sister-in-law who embodies grace under pressure and dignity in the face of adversity will teach Emma more valuable lessons than all your wives' tea parties combined. James uncrossed his arms and took a step forward, his voice dropping to something quiet and dangerous. Gentlemen, I will say this once. I am marrying Sarah Mitchell in 2 weeks. You are welcome to attend the wedding or not, as you choose. But if anyone, and I mean anyone, insults or mistreats my wife, they will answer to me. I suggest you take that message back to your families. The delegation left unsatisfied, muttering among themselves about pride and foolishness. Diego approached James once they were gone, shaking his head with wry admiration. You have made powerful enemies today, amigo. Then they were never really friends. James picked up his tools again. Help me finish this fence. I want everything in good order before the wedding. Diego clapped him on the shoulder. She must be some woman to inspire such loyalty. She is, James said simply, and returned to work. At the boarding house, Sarah was experiencing her own confrontation. Mrs. Hutchins had wasted no time spreading the news, and several of the town's leading women had arrived to make their feelings known. They crowded into the small parlor, a wall of righteous indignation in their Sunday best despite it being a weekday. Have you no shame, Mrs. Henderson demanded, trapping a good man like James Cooper with your wiles? Sarah stood near the window, her hands clasped tightly in front of her to keep them from shaking. I trapped no one. Mr. Cooper proposed of his own free will. Because he is too kind for his own good and you took advantage of that kindness, Mrs. Thompson snapped. A decent woman would refuse him, would spare him the stigma of association with someone like you. Someone like me? Sarah repeated the word softly, then raised her eyes to meet theirs. All the weeks of swallowing insults, of enduring whispers and cold shoulders, of trying to make herself small and inoffensive suddenly crystallized into something harder. You know nothing about me. Nothing about what actually happened in St. Louis. You traffic in rumors and half-truths because it makes you feel superior, makes your own lives seem more virtuous by comparison. We know enough, Mrs. Henderson retorted. We know you are not fit to marry into a respectable family. Then I suppose it is fortunate that James gets to decide what he finds respectable, not you. Sarah walked to the door and opened it pointedly. This conversation is over. I am going to marry James Cooper, and no amount of gossip will change that. Now please leave. The women filed out in offended silence, though Mrs. Thompson could not resist a parting shot. You will regret this. He will come to his senses eventually and see you for what you truly are. What I truly am is someone James Cooper chose, Sarah said quietly, and that is enough for me. After they left, Sarah closed the door and leaned against it, her bravado crumbling now that she was alone. But underneath the fear and doubt, something else stirred, something that felt almost like hope. Emma Cooper learned about the engagement from her friend Mary Beth, who delivered the news with wide-eyed scandal. Emma rode home immediately, bursting into the ranch house where James was reviewing account books at the kitchen table. Is it true? She demanded. Are you really marrying the woman from the store? James set down his pencil and regarded his sister calmly. Her name is Sarah, and yes, I am. But everyone says she is terrible. They say she did shameful things back east. Emma, sit down. James waited until she complied, then continued in a measured tone. I am going to tell you something important, something I need you to understand. People like to talk. They like to judge. They especially like to judge women more harshly than men for the same mistakes. Sarah made the error of being alone with a man she should not have trusted. That is all. She did nothing criminal, nothing truly shameful, but her reputation was destroyed anyway, and she had to leave everything she knew to start over. Emma frowned, processing this. That does not seem fair. It is not fair. And the way this town has treated her since she arrived is not fair either. James leaned forward. Sarah is kind, intelligent, and hardworking. I think you will like her if you give her a chance, but even if you do not, I am asking you to be respectful. She is going to be part of our family. Will she try to replace Mama? Emma's voice was small, revealing the real fear beneath the bluster. James softened. No one could ever replace Mama. Sarah knows about our parents, about how much we loved them. She is not trying to erase them. She is just trying to build a future, same as we are. Emma was quiet for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Okay, I will try, for you. Thank you. James pulled her into a brief hug. I think you will be surprised. She was a school teacher, you know. She might actually be able to help with that arithmetic you have been struggling with. Despite herself, Emma smiled. Really? Because those fractions are absolutely impossible. The 2 weeks before the wedding passed in a blur of preparation and continued controversy. James arranged for the ceremony to be held at the ranch rather than the church, suspecting correctly that Reverend Miller would face too much pressure from his congregation to perform the service comfortably. Instead, he found a circuit preacher passing through, a grizzled old Methodist who asked no questions and agreed to officiate for a modest fee. Sarah spent her remaining time at the boarding house sewing a simple wedding dress from cream-colored muslin, her fingers moving steadily through long evenings. She had no friends to help her, no excited chatter of bridesmaids, none of the joyful anticipation that usually accompanied a bride's preparations, but she found she did not mind the solitude. It gave her time to think, to marvel at the strange turn her life had taken, to nurture the fragile hope that was taking root in her heart. James visited her each evening, their conversations growing longer and more comfortable. They discussed practical matters, what duties she would take on at the ranch, how they would arrange the house, what Emma needed. But they also talked about deeper things. Sarah spoke haltingly about her life in St. Louis, about the man who had claimed to be a friend of her fiancé and had convinced her to meet him privately to discuss a surprise for the wedding, about how they had been discovered in a closed office, her reputation destroyed in an instant despite the innocence of the situation, about how her fiancé had believed the worst, how her family had been too ashamed to defend her. James listened without judgment, his anger directed not at her but at those who had failed to protect her. In turn, he told her about his parents' deaths, about the desperate struggle to keep the ranch running while caring for a devastated child, about the loneliness of being responsible for everything and everyone with no one to share the burden. You should know I'm not easy to live with, James admitted one evening as they sat on the boarding house porch in the cooling dusk. I get focused on work and forget to talk sometimes. I have strong opinions about how things should be done. Diego says I'm stubborn as a fence post. Sarah smiled. I talk too much when I'm nervous. I rearrange things obsessively. I have nightmares sometimes and wake up crying. She paused. We are both damaged, I think. Then maybe we can be damaged together. James reached over and took her hand the first time he had done so. His palm was warm and calloused, and Sarah felt something settle inside her at the touch. I want you to know, Sarah, I will never raise a hand to you. I will never demean you or make you feel small, and I will never believe rumors about you over your own words. Tears pricked Sarah's eyes. I will work hard. I will be a good wife. I will never give you cause to regret this choice. I know. James squeezed her hand gently. I already know. The wedding day arrived with a clear September sky, the brutal heat of summer finally breaking into something more temperate. Sarah dressed in her simple gown, her hands steady as she pinned up her hair. She owned no jewelry except a cameo brooch that had belonged to her grandmother, and she fastened it at her throat like armor. Mrs. Hutchins, her curiosity apparently outweighing her disapproval, offered to drive Sarah to the ranch. The ride was conducted in chilly silence, but Sarah found she did not care. Let the woman think what she would. In a few hours, Sarah would be Mrs. James Cooper, and she would never have to endure the boarding house again. The ranch appeared as they crested a small rise, a neat collection of buildings nestled in a valley with Copper Creek running silver through green pastures. The house was modest but well built, whitewashed wood with a wide porch. Corrals and outbuildings spread behind it, everything showing signs of careful maintenance. A few people had gathered near the house, though far fewer than would have attended a typical wedding. James stood on the porch, wearing a clean white shirt and dark trousers, his hair neatly combed, his expression lighting up as the wagon approached. Diego was there, along with several ranch hands Sarah did not know. Emma stood beside her brother looking nervous but determined. And to Sarah's surprise, Mr. Pearson had come, and his wife Martha, a quiet woman who had always been kind during Sarah's brief employment at the store. James helped Sarah down from the wagon, his hand steadying her. "You look beautiful," he said quietly, and the sincerity in his voice made her throat tight with emotion. "So do you," she managed, and he laughed, some of the tension breaking. The circuit preacher, a leather-faced man named Brother Daniels, performed a simple ceremony on the porch. There were no elaborate vows, no lengthy sermons, just the essential words binding two people together. When James slipped a plain gold band onto Sarah's finger, she stared at it in wonder. She had not expected a ring, had not thought that far ahead. But here it was, solid and real, claiming her as his. "You may kiss your bride," Brother Daniels announced, and James leaned in, pressing his lips to Sarah's in a gentle, sweet kiss that promised patience and protection. The small gathering applauded, and just like that, Sarah Mitchell became Sarah Cooper. The celebration afterward was modest but warm. Martha Pearson had brought food, and Diego's wife, Rosa, appeared with more, a cheerful woman who embraced Sarah and declared that the ranch needed a woman's touch. Emma approached shyly, presenting Sarah with a bouquet of wildflowers she had picked that morning. "Welcome to the family," Emma said, and Sarah hugged her, feeling the girl stiffen in surprise before slowly relaxing into the embrace. "Thank you," Sarah whispered. "I will try to be a good sister to you." As the sun began to set, the guests departed, and Sarah found herself alone with James and Emma in the house that was now her home. James showed her through the rooms, pointing out what needed improvement, asking her opinion on arrangements. The house was clean but sparse, clearly lacking a woman's influence for many years. "We can change whatever you like," James said. "Make it yours." Sarah ran her hand along the back of a worn sofa, imagining curtains at the windows, rugs on the floors, all the small touches that transformed a house into a home. "I think we should make it ours," she corrected softly. That night, after Emma had gone to bed, James and Sarah sat together on the porch, listening to the night sounds of the ranch. The awkwardness of being newly married hung between them, neither quite sure how to navigate this strange new intimacy. "I thought we might take things slow," James said carefully. "Get to know each other better before we are truly husband and wife in all ways." Relief flooded through Sarah. "I would like that." "Good." James reached over and took her hand, lacing their fingers together. "I want you to feel safe here, Sarah. Always." They sat in companionable silence, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky, and Sarah felt something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. It took her a moment to recognize it as contentment. But the town of Redemption Creek was not finished with them yet. The following Sunday, James decided they should attend church as a family. Sarah protested, but James was adamant. "We have nothing to be ashamed of," he insisted, "and I will not have you hiding as though we did something wrong." They arrived as a unit, James, Sarah, and Emma, walking up the church steps together. The conversations on the lawn died away as people stared. Inside, families shifted in their pews, suddenly finding their usual spaces too crowded to accommodate the Cooper party. James walked calmly down the aisle, leading Sarah and Emma to a pew in the middle of the church, not hiding in the back but claiming their place in the community. Reverend Miller stumbled through his sermon, clearly rattled by their presence. During the hymns, voices around them fell silent, leaving the Cooper family singing alone. After the service, people streamed out without making eye contact, conversations resuming only once they were safely past. Emma's face was red with embarrassment, and Sarah felt her own cheeks burning. But James simply nodded to those they passed, his head high, his hand firm on Sarah's back. Outside, Mayor Thornton blocked their path, his expression stern. "James, this is inappropriate. You are making a mockery of this institution by bringing that woman here." Something inside Sarah snapped. For weeks, she had endured insults with quiet dignity, had turned the other cheek, had tried to be small and inoffensive, but she was done shrinking. "That woman has a name," Sarah said clearly, her voice carrying across the suddenly silent churchyard. "That woman is Sarah Cooper now, wife of James Cooper, and she has as much right to worship here as anyone. More right, perhaps, than those of you who profess Christianity but practice cruelty." She turned to face the assembled townspeople. "You want to know what happened in St. Louis? I was foolish enough to trust a man who claimed to be a friend. I met him alone, which was improper, but not criminal. He attempted to force himself on me, and when I fought back, we were discovered. Instead of being seen as a victim, I was blamed. My fiancé abandoned me. My family disowned me. I came here hoping for a fresh start, and you have all made it abundantly clear that forgiveness is something you preach but do not practice." The crowd was stunned into silence. Even James looked surprised at his wife's sudden, fierce eloquence. Sarah continued, her voice steady despite the trembling in her limbs. "I have made mistakes. I used poor judgment, but I have hurt no one, stolen nothing, destroyed no lives. I work hard, keep my word, and try to be kind. If that is not enough for you, then the failing is yours, not mine." She looked directly at Reverend Miller. "I seem to recall a story about a woman caught in adultery, and a man who said, 'Let he who is without sin cast the first stone.' Perhaps you might revisit that passage." She turned back to James. "I am ready to go home now." James nodded, something like pride blazing in his eyes. He offered Sarah his arm, Emma took the other, and they walked through the parted crowd to their wagon. No one said a word. No one tried to stop them. The ride home was silent for the first mile. Then Emma suddenly burst out laughing. "Did you see their faces? They looked like landed fish." Sarah started laughing too, the tension of the morning pouring out in helpless giggles. Even James cracked a smile. "You were magnificent," he said to Sarah. "I've never seen anyone render Margaret Thompson speechless before." "I probably made everything worse," Sarah said, though she found she did not particularly care. "Maybe. Or maybe you gave them something to think about." James flicked the reins. "Either way, I am proud to call you my wife." The words settled over Sarah like a benediction. Someone was proud of her. Someone chose her, defended her, stood by her. After months of shame and isolation, the relief was almost overwhelming. Over the following weeks, life on the ranch established its rhythms. Sarah threw herself into improving the house, sewing curtains, planting a small garden, organizing the chaos of years of bachelor living. She helped Emma with her studies, delighted to discover the girl was bright but had simply lacked patient instruction. She learned to cook for ranch hands, to manage the household accounts, to navigate the practical demands of frontier life. And slowly, carefully, she and James built something deeper than convenience. They talked late into the evenings, sharing hopes and fears and all the small details that comprise a life. James taught her to ride, his hand steadying her on a gentle mare named Daisy. Sarah read aloud in the evenings, her voice bringing literature to a house that had known too little softness. One evening in late October, Diego approached James with news. "There is talk in town. Some of the women are changing their minds about your wife." James looked up from the harness he was mending. "What do you mean?" "Martha Pearson speaks well of her. Says she was the best employee her husband ever had. Rosa visits her now. Has been telling others that Sarah is kind and generous. Even some of the ranch wives have started asking questions, wanting to know the truth instead of the rumors." Diego grinned. "Your woman's speech at the church, it made an impression. Some people are ashamed of how they acted." James absorbed this carefully. "Has anyone apologized to her?" "Not yet. But it will come. You wait." He was right. The first crack in the wall came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Thornton, the mayor's wife, appeared at the ranch one afternoon in November, her expression nervous. Sarah answered the door, surprise evident on her face. "Mrs. Thornton, how can I help you?" The older woman twisted her hands together. "I came to apologize. I was part of the group that confronted you at the boarding house, and I said terrible things, things I had no right to say." She took a breath. "My sister wrote to me. She lives in St. Louis. She made inquiries about you, and she learned the truth about what happened. You were the victim, not the villain. I am so sorry for judging you without knowing the facts." Sarah stared at her, not quite believing what she was hearing. "You believe me?" "I do. And I want you to know I have been speaking to other women, telling them the truth. Not everyone will listen, but some are starting to see that we treated you abominably." Mrs. Thornton's eyes filled with tears. "Can you ever forgive me?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment, years of pain and anger warring with the tentative hope of acceptance. Finally, she nodded. "Yes, I can forgive you. Thank you for coming." Mrs. Thornton left shortly after, but her visit was only the first. Over the following weeks, other women came, some to apologize, some simply to introduce themselves properly, some to ask Sarah to join various church committees and social groups. The tide was turning slowly but unmistakably. The change was most evident at the church Christmas social in December. When Sarah entered on James's arm, several women greeted her warmly. Martha Pearson pulled her aside to introduce her to the new school teacher, suggesting Sarah might help with the older students who were struggling with literature. Even Reverend Miller approached, his manner apologetic. "Mrs. Cooper, I owe you an apology. I failed to show you Christian charity when you most needed it. I hope you can forgive me." "I can, Reverend," Sarah said quietly, "and we all fall short sometimes." Margaret Thompson remained coldly distant, as did a few others, but they were now the minority rather than the majority. Sarah found herself included in conversations, invited to events, treated with the respect due to any rancher's wife. That night, as she and James prepared for bed, Sarah studied herself in the mirror. She looked different than she had 4 months ago. Her face had filled out slightly from regular meals and less stress. Her eyes held more light. She looked, she realized with wonder, happy. James appeared behind her, his hands settling on her shoulders. Their eyes met in the mirror. "You have transformed this place," he said softly. "The house, the ranch, Emma, me." Sarah turned to face him. "You saved me. You gave me a home when I had nowhere to go. You defended me when no one else would. I chose you because I wanted to, not out of pity." James cupped her face in his hands. "I chose you because you are strong and brave and kind, because you face adversity with dignity, because when I look at you, I see someone worth fighting for." "I love you," Sarah whispered, the words escaping before she could stop them. "I think I have loved you since the day you offered me your help in the general store, expecting nothing in return." James smiled, that rare, transformative expression that made him look young and carefree. "I love you too. I have been trying to find the right time to tell you." He kissed her then, not the chaste kiss of their wedding day, but something deeper, more urgent, full of promise. That night, they truly became husband and wife in all ways, coming together with tenderness and passion, building something new from the ashes of old pain. Winter passed into spring, and Sarah bloomed along with the wildflowers. By April, she suspected she was pregnant, though she said nothing until she was certain. When she finally told James in May, his whoop of joy echoed across the ranch, sending Emma running from the house to discover what had happened. "You are going to have a niece or nephew," James announced, sweeping his sister into a hug. Emma threw her arms around Sarah. "Really? That is wonderful. Can I help with the baby?" "I will need all the help I can get," Sarah assured her, touched by the girl's enthusiasm. The town received the news with genuine happiness. Sarah had won them over through patience, dignity, and time. When she appeared at church the following Sunday, visibly expecting, the congratulations were warm and sincere. Even Margaret Thompson unbent enough to offer stiff good wishes. The baby arrived in January of 1882, a healthy boy with his father's dark hair and his mother's green eyes. They named him Daniel, after James's father, and the ranch hands celebrated with such enthusiasm that Rosa had to shoo them away from the house to let Sarah rest. James held his son with a look of such profound wonder that Sarah felt tears streaming down her face. "He is perfect," James breathed. "You are perfect." Emma proved to be a devoted aunt, spending hours rocking Daniel and singing to him. Diego carved the baby a beautiful wooden cradle, and the women of the town arrived with a steady stream of baby clothes and gifts. As Sarah recovered from the birth, she reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her here. A year and a half ago, she had arrived in Redemption Creek with nothing but shame and desperation. Now she had a husband who loved her, a sister-in-law who had become a true friend, a son, and a community that had learned to see past their prejudices. One afternoon in early spring, as Sarah nursed Daniel on the porch while watching James work with a young horse in the corral, Mrs. Thornton stopped by with a basket of preserves. "I wanted you to know," the older woman said, "you have changed this town. The way you carried yourself with dignity, the way you refused to let cruelty break you, it made us examine ourselves. We are better for having you here." After she left, Sarah considered those words. She had not set out to change anything, had simply tried to survive with what grace she could muster. But perhaps that was enough. Perhaps simply refusing to be diminished by others' judgments, simply insisting on her own worth, had been a kind of quiet revolution. That evening, as the family gathered for dinner around a table laden with food from Sarah's garden, Emma announced she had been invited to a dance by the blacksmith's son, a nice young man named Thomas. Sarah and James exchanged amused glances, both thinking the same thing. Emma was growing up. "You can go," James said, "but I want you home by 10. And Thomas had better be a perfect gentleman." Emma rolled her eyes but smiled. "He is, I promise. Sarah, will you help me with my dress?" "Of course," Sarah agreed, warmth flooding through her at the casual way Emma included her in such moments. After dinner, James pulled Sarah aside. "I have been thinking. The ranch is doing well, better than ever. I thought we might expand the house, add another bedroom or two, for more children, if we are blessed." Sarah leaned into him, Daniel sleeping contentedly in her arms. "I would like that. I would like a large family." "Then a large family you shall have," James promised, kissing her forehead. The years that followed were not without challenges. There were droughts and difficult winters, cattle losses, and lean seasons. Emma married Thomas when she turned 19, moving to town but visiting often. Sarah and James had 3 more children, a daughter named Grace, then twin boys they called Matthew and Luke. Through it all, their love deepened and strengthened. They learned each other's rhythms, supported each other through difficulties, celebrated victories together. Sarah never forgot the darkness of her past, but it no longer defined her. She was Mrs. James Cooper, beloved wife, devoted mother, respected member of the community. On their 10th anniversary, James surprised her with a trip to Santa Fe, arranging for Rosa to watch the children. As they stood together on the plaza, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson, Sarah reflected on the unlikely path that had led them here. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Marrying me despite all the controversy?" James pulled her close, his arms secure around her. "Not for one single moment. You are the best decision I ever made." "I was so broken when I arrived here," Sarah said softly. "I thought my life was over." "You were never broken. You were bent, maybe, but never broken. And even if you had been, we would have healed together." James turned her to face him, his expression serious. "You gave me everything, Sarah, a real home, a family, joy. I was just existing before you, going through motions. You taught me how to truly live." Sarah kissed him, pouring 10 years of love and gratitude into the gesture. We saved each other. Yes, James agreed. We did. They returned home to chaos and laughter, Grace practicing her letters at the kitchen table while the twins built a fort from chairs and blankets. Daniel, now 9, was helping Diego with the horses, already showing signs of the rancher he would become. That night, after the children were finally in bed, Sarah and James sat on their porch as they had done countless times before, watching the stars emerge. The house behind them glowed with lamplight, filled with the evidence of their life together. Children's drawings, Daniel's school prizes, Grace's sampler, muddy boots by the door. I wish I could go back and tell that frightened woman who stepped off the stagecoach 10 years ago that everything would be all right, Sarah mused. She would not have believed you, James said. No, probably not, Sarah smiled. But she would have been wrong. James took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. Do you think the town has truly forgotten? The gossip? The judgment? I think they remember, Sarah said thoughtfully. But now they remember other things too. They remember how I helped Martha Pearson when Albert was sick. They remember how I organized the school fundraiser. They remember that our family contributes to this community. The past is still there, but it is not the whole story anymore. You made them see you as you truly are, James said. That took courage. Sarah leaned her head on his shoulder. It took you. It took someone believing in me enough that I could believe in myself again. They sat in comfortable silence, the night sounds of the ranch a familiar symphony. From inside, one of the twins called out in his sleep, and Sarah stirred, ready to check on him. But the house fell quiet again, and she settled back against James. Do you remember what you said the night you proposed? Sarah asked. You said you thought you were already halfway to loving me. I remember. When did you reach the whole way? James considered. I think it was the day at the church, when you stood up to the whole town. I saw your strength then, saw who you really were beneath the fear. I fell completely in love in that moment. I fell completely in love the night of our wedding, Sarah confessed, when you said you wanted me to always feel safe. No one had ever cared about my safety before, not really. You will always be safe with me, James promised, you and our children. That is my vow to you, renewed every day. Years continued to pass in the steady rhythm of ranch life. Daniel grew into a strong, capable young man who took over more responsibilities with each season. Grace proved to have her mother's love of learning and began helping the school teacher in town. The twins, rambunctious and inseparable, kept everyone on their toes. Sarah and James aged together, silver threading through their hair, lines deepening around their eyes, but their love remained constant. They had become a fixture in Redemption Creek, the Coopers, a family that stood for something. When new people arrived in town, uncertain and seeking fresh starts, Sarah always made a point to welcome them, to offer kindness without judgment. She remembered what it felt like to be alone and frightened, and she would not let others suffer as she had. In 1895, Emma gave birth to her 4th child, a daughter she named Sarah in honor of her sister-in-law. When Emma placed the baby in Sarah's arms, both women cried happy tears. You have been more than a sister to me, Emma said. You have been a second mother, a friend, a guide. I wanted her to have your name, your strength. Sarah held her namesake close, marveling at the gift. I will do my best to be worthy of the honor. That evening, as they prepared for bed in the house that had been expanded and improved over 2 decades of marriage, James watched Sarah brush out her long hair, now more silver than auburn. Do you know you are even more beautiful now than the day I married you? He said. Sarah laughed. Your eyesight must be failing, my love. My eyesight is perfect. James came to stand behind her, taking the brush from her hand. I see the woman who turned my house into a home, the woman who raised our children with wisdom and love, the woman who showed a whole town what grace and dignity look like. How could I not find you beautiful? Sarah turned on the bench to face him, taking his weathered hands in hers. "We have built a good life, have we not?" "The best life," James agreed. "Better than I ever imagined possible." "All because you saw past the gossip to the person underneath." Sarah squeezed his hands. "All because you were brave enough to marry me anyway." "Bravest thing I ever did," James said. "And the smartest." They went to bed wrapped in each other's arms, as they had done for over 20 years, finding comfort and love in the familiar warmth of their embrace. The next morning brought news from town. Margaret Thompson had finally passed away, the last holdout from that original group of women who had made Sarah's early days in Redemption Creek so difficult. Sarah felt no triumph at the news, only a gentle sadness for a life spent in judgment rather than joy. She attended the funeral with James, paying her respects with genuine compassion. Mrs. Thompson's daughter approached her afterward, her eyes red from crying. "My mother spoke of you near the end," she said. "She asked me to tell you she was sorry. She said you were right to call her out that day at the church, that she spent too much of her life worrying about other people's business instead of examining her own heart." Sarah felt tears sting her eyes. "Tell her I forgave her long ago. Tell her I hope she has found peace." As they rode home, James glanced at his wife. "You are too good, you know that?" "No," Sarah said softly. "I just know what it is like to need forgiveness. How could I withhold it from others?" The seasons turned. Children grew and married, and had children of their own. The ranch prospered, becoming one of the most successful in the territory. When Arizona achieved statehood in 1912, Daniel Cooper was elected to represent their district in the new state legislature, a source of enormous pride for his parents. Sarah and James grew old together, their steps slower but their devotion undiminished. They spent long evenings on their porch, surrounded by grandchildren, telling stories of the early days of how they met and fell in love against all odds. "Tell us about when Grandfather proposed," Grady, Grace's eldest daughter, begged one warm summer evening. Sarah and James exchanged smiles, the story as fresh in their memories as if it had happened yesterday rather than decades ago. "Your grandmother had lost everything," James began, taking Sarah's hand as he spoke. "Her reputation, her home, her hope. The whole town had decided who she was based on gossip and rumor, but I saw something different. I saw courage and dignity and strength." "And your grandfather," Sarah continued, "and saw past the surface to the person I really was. He married me when doing so cost him socially, when his friends and neighbors told him he was making a mistake. He chose love over convention, mercy over judgment. That is the most romantic thing ever," the girls sighed, and the adults laughed. "It was not so romantic at the time," Sarah said dryly. "It was terrifying. But your grandfather made me feel safe. He made me feel valued, and eventually he made me feel loved." "We were both lucky," James added. "We found each other when we needed each other most." As the sun set and the grandchildren were called home, Sarah and James remained on the porch, watching twilight settle over the land they had built together. "We did all right, did we not?" James said, his voice soft with age but still strong with conviction. "We did better than all right," Sarah replied. "We built something beautiful. Not just the ranch or the house, but the family, the love, the life. We turned shame into honor. We silenced the gossips with joy." "I would do it all again," James said. "Every moment, every challenge, every triumph. All of it exactly the same because it led me here to you." Sarah kissed him gently. "As would I, my love. As would I." They sat together as darkness fell, two people who had defied expectations and created their own happy ending. The whispers that had once threatened to destroy Sarah had faded into memory, replaced by respect and admiration. The cowboy who had married her anyway had become a beloved patriarch, a man known for his integrity and compassion. And on warm evenings in Redemption Creek, when the old-timers gathered to tell stories, they always included the tale of Sarah and James Cooper, the scandalous woman and the cowboy who loved her enough to change a town's heart. It became a legend of sorts, a reminder that grace and love could triumph over prejudice, that second chances were always possible, and that sometimes the bravest thing a person could do was choose mercy when the world demanded judgment. Their legacy lived on in their children and grandchildren, in the values they instilled, in the example they set. They taught that character was built not in the absence of mistakes, but in how one recovered from them. They proved that love could be found in the most unlikely circumstances and could flourish despite opposition. And when James finally passed away in 1918 at the age of 67, with Sarah holding his hand and surrounded by family, his last words were, "Marrying you was the best decision of my life." Sarah lived another 5 years, cherished by her children and the community she had won over through patience and grace. When she passed quietly in her sleep in 1923, the whole town mourned. The church was packed for her funeral, filled with people whose lives she had touched, whose prejudices she had gently dismantled, whose hearts she had opened. They buried her next to James on a hill overlooking the ranch, beneath a cottonwood tree they had planted together in their first year of marriage. The headstone read, "Sarah Mitchell Cooper, beloved wife, mother, grandmother. She taught us all how to forgive." And in the years that followed, when new generations heard the story of the townspeople who gossiped about her past mistakes, and the cowboy who married her anyway and silenced them all, they understood it for what it truly was, a testament to the transformative power of unconditional love, the kind of love that looks past faults and sees potential, that chooses grace over judgment, that builds rather than destroys. It was a love story for the ages, born in the Wild West but timeless in its message. And it all began with a frightened woman stepping off a stagecoach and a quiet cowboy who saw her not as the town did but as she truly was, worthy of love, worthy of defense, worthy of a second chance. Their story became legend, passed down through generations, inspiring others to look beyond surface judgments, to offer grace instead of gossip, to remember that everyone carries burdens unseen and everyone deserves the chance to begin again. The ranch still stands, now operated by great-great-grandchildren who honor the legacy of courage and compassion established so many years ago. And sometimes on warm summer evenings, if you listen closely, you can almost hear the echo of their laughter on the wind, the sound of two souls who found each other against all odds and built a love that conquered prejudice, outlasted gossip, and proved that sometimes the greatest act of defiance is simply choosing to love without condition, to forgive without hesitation, and to believe in second chances even when the world insists they are undeserved. That is the story of Sarah and James Cooper, and it is a story worth remembering.